Nurse Mara Ellison stood in the locked ER corridor with both palms open. Her new badge still clipped too stiffly to her scrubs, while Colonel Grant Mercer pointed at her, like she was an intruder instead of the only person who had noticed the only person. Warning, on the lockdown chart. You are nothing, he said, loud enough for the orderlies, interns, and frightened families to hear. A few people laughed because fear made them cruel, and because Mara was the new nurse no one trusted yet. Behind the security glass, an old military K-9 named Ranger stared at her from beside an empty handler's chair, ears still, eyes fixed on the small patch Mara had tried to hide beneath her sleeve. The lockdown alarm pulsed red. Mara looked at the chart again and whispered, "That corridor is wrong." But Colonel Mercer only stepped closer and said, "Then prove who you are. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. And if stories about loyal nines, forgotten nurses, and the truth finally coming into the light move you, subscribe to 9 Rescue Nurse and stay with this one until the end." The alarm had begun 9 minutes earlier, though everyone in the ER corridor would remember it later as if it had been screaming for hours. St. Adrian Military Medical Center was not supposed to panic. It had sealed doors, drilled staff, coded badges, and officers who spoke in clipped voices meant to make everyone feel safe. But lockdowns had a way of stripping away confidence. Doors slammed shut. Families froze mid-prayer. Nurses abandoned coffee cups at their stations. Security officers took positions by the trauma bay, and the bright white corridor outside the ER turned into a narrow courtroom where everybody watched everybody else for signs of weakness. Mara Ellison felt every stare. She had been at St. Adrian's for only 11 days. Her locker still smelled like cardboard. Her name had not made it onto the permanent shift board. Half the staff still called her the transfer, because no one knew why a quiet civilian nurse in her late 30s had been placed in a military hospital during a staffing freeze. She did not correct them. Correcting people meant answering questions, and Mara had spent 5 years surviving by not answering questions. A young intern named Emily Ross stood beside the medication cart, clutching a clipboard to her chest. "Is this a drill?" she whispered. "No," Mara said. Emily looked at her. "How do you know?" Mara kept her eyes on the corridor map mounted beside the ER doors. A red lockdown overlay had dropped across the screen, showing sealed corridors, approved movement routes, and emergency containment lines. Something about the map was wrong. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just one thin route, highlighted in green, that should never have been green during a base-side lockdown. East Service Hall. Mara's throat tightened. That hall ran behind the oxygen storage alcove, past the 9 recovery room, and into the narrow transfer corridor, where critical patients could be moved without crossing the public lobby. It was a useful route in normal conditions, but in a lockdown triggered by an unknown breach, it was a trap. Too many doors, too many blind angles, too many places where frightened people could bottleneck. "Who approved this route?" Mara asked. No one answered. Colonel Grant Mercer arrived before anyone could. He moved like a man used to rooms making space for him. Tall, square-jawed, immaculate uniform, silver at the temples. Voice already sharp before he said a word. Behind him came Dr. Victor Sloan, the senior trauma surgeon, still wearing a surgical cap and the tired arrogance of a man who believed exhaustion made him untouchable. "Everyone stays where they are," Mercer ordered. "No one moves unless cleared by security." Mara stepped toward the map. "Colonel, East Service Hall should be closed." Mercer turned slowly, as if surprised the wall had spoken. "And you are?" Nurse Mara Ellison. Airfloat rotation. His eyes dropped to her badge, then returned to her face without interest. "New staff do not direct lockdown procedure. I am not directing. I'm warning you. Dr. Sloan gave a short laugh. She has been here less than 2 weeks. Several people looked down, pretending not to hear. Myra felt heat climb her neck, but she kept her voice steady. The route runs past the 9 recovery room and the supply alcove. If your breach is internal, you're moving patients through the least controlled hall in the wing. Mercer's face hardened. Our breach is not your concern. Is stretchers through it. Do you have command clearance? No. No. Security authorization? No. Military training? Mara hesitated. It was less than a second. To anyone else, it might have meant nothing. To Colonel Mercer, it looked like guilt. He smiled without warmth, then stepped back. Mara could have obeyed. She had learned the safety of silence. Silence got you through background checks that stalled for no reason. Silence kept old names buried. Silence let you stand in fluorescent hallways, while men with louder titles rearranged danger into policy. Then the 9 barked once from behind the glass. Everyone flinched. The dog was in the recovery room across the corridor, separated by thick observation glass and a half-open privacy blind. Ranger was large, black and tan, old enough for gray to frost his muzzle, but still built with the quiet strength of a working dog. A faded red tag hung from his collar. His military harness lay unused on the chair beside him, because no handler had been able to put it on him without him going rigid. The staff called him unwanted, not cruelly, most of them, just with the careless pity people use when they do not know the whole story. Ranger had arrived 3 days earlier from an off-base kennel after refusing 3 reassignment attempts. His old unit had been dissolved. His handler's chair stayed empty. His file was sealed under a military working dog case number that even the veterinary liaison could not fully open. Mara had noticed him the first morning. More importantly, Ranger had noticed her. He had not barked then. He had simply watched. Now he stood with both paws planted and eyes locked on Mara's left sleeve. Mara lowered her arm at once. Too late. Colonel Mercer noticed. What is under your sleeve? He asked. Nothing relevant. That is not what I asked. Mara did not move. Dr. Sloan stepped closer, voice low enough to sound private and loud enough to humiliate her. We have a lockdown. A sealed 9 file. A new nurse no one can place, and now she is hiding something. Wonderful, Emily whispered. Doctor. Quiet. Sloan snapped. Mara's jaw tightened, not at the insult, but at Emily's small flinch. The intern was too young to understand how quickly a room could decide whom to blame. Colonel Mercer held out his hand. Show me. Mara slowly rolled her sleeve back. There was no weapon, no contraband, no stolen badge. Only a worn rectangular patch folded and pinned beneath the cuff. The dark fabric almost faded smooth. Most of the stitching had frayed away, but one piece remained clear. A white wing, a single black number beneath it, 9. The corridor went still. Dr. Sloan frowned. What is that supposed to be? Mara covered again. Old cloth. Ranger pressed his nose to the glass. Colonel Mercer glanced at the dog, then back at Mara. For the first time, suspicion sharpened into something more focused. Where did you get that? Mara looked at the lockdown map instead of him. Close East Service Hall. You do not give me orders. Then, let someone else verify it. Mercer stepped closer. His voice dropped. Listen carefully. This hospital is under military lockdown. You are a temporary civilian nurse with no command authority, no confirmed clearance, and a hidden patch that makes a sealed 9 react. Until I know what you are, you will stand down. Mara looked past him to the transfer team gathering near the wrong corridor. 2 orderlies were already moving a patient monitor toward East Service Hall. Stop them, she said. Mercer did not turn. You are finished talking. Ranger barked again, louder. Not wild, not aggressive. A warning. Myra felt an old ache open beneath her ribs, a memory she had spent years pressured dust, a radio cutting in and out, a dog refusing to leave a lapsed doorway, a voice saying, "Nurse, if he alerts twice, trust him before you trust us." She swallowed it back. No one here knew that voice. No one here could. Dr. Sloan gestured to security. "Move her away from the ER doors." Emily's eyes widened. "She was just trying to help." "She is obstructing emergency command," Sloan said. Mara took one step back before the guards touched her. She refused to give them the satisfaction of dragging her. Then the ER speaker crackled. A dispatcher's voice broke through the alarm. "Command, the advised partial file request has been triggered on military working dog Ranger. Case number Case 17. Authorization pending." From base records, Colonel Mercer froze. Mara closed her eyes for half a breath, and Ranger behind the glass stopped barking. He lowered his head, not in fear, but as if waiting for command. Only Mara remembered. The partial file did not open. That was the first thing Colonel Mercer used against her. "Pending is not proof," he said, as if the entire corridor had accused him of something. No one had. Not yet. The dispatcher repeated that base records was attempting to retrieve the military working dog case file. The system had flagged a name conflict, a service tag conflict, and an inactive medical code buried so deep in the hospital archive that even the security terminal seemed unsure whether it was permitted to display it. Myra knew what that meant. Someone had stored Ranger under one file, then cross-linked him to another. A human file. Hers, or what had once been hers. She looked at the East Service Hall route again. The green line still glowed across the map like a lie. "Colonel," she said, "I need you to lock that hallway." Mercer's eyes cut to her. "You need to stop speaking." A radio officer near the nurse's station lifted his handset. "Sir, transfer team is asking whether to proceed." "Proceed," Mercer said. Mara moved before she could reconsider. She stepped around him and hit the manual hold button on the wall panel. A harsh tone sounded. The green route changed to yellow. Every head in the corridor turned. For 3 seconds, no one breathed. Then Colonel Mercer seized her wrists, not violently, not enough to hurt, but publicly, firmly. A commander stopping a nobody. "What did I tell you?" he said. Mara looked at his hand around her wrist, then at his face. "That hallway is unsafe. You just interfered with lockdown movement. I delayed it for 30 seconds. Dr. Sloan came forward, furious. "A patient is waiting, and if you move them through the wrong hall, more patients will be waiting." Sloan's mouth twisted. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Ranger growled from behind the glass. The sound was low and controlled, directed not at the room, but at Mercer's grip on Mara's wrist. Mercer released her at once, more from optics than fear. "Get that dog secured," he ordered. A young military handler named Sergeant Caleb Voss stepped from the 9 recovery room doorway. He had been assigned to Ranger that morning, though everyone knew Ranger had not accepted him. Caleb held a leash in one hand and a nervous expression in the other. "Sir, Ranger is secure. He is reacting to her." Caleb looked at Mara, then at the dog. "Yes, sir. Why?" "I don't know," Mara did. Ranger had been trained to read hands, breath, posture, and the small eyes humans tell with their shoulders. He had guarded field medics, found missing soldiers, and waited beside the wounded without moving even when the world around him broke. He did not react because Mara had a patch. He reacted because he remembered the person who had worn it. Mara had not known he was alive. That was the thought that almost broke her. Not the insult, not Mercer's suspicion, not Sloan's contempt. Ranger was alive, older, grayer, unwanted by people who could not read his grief, but alive. Her fingers curled around the edge of the medication cart until her knuckles whitened. Emily noticed. "Nurse Ellison, I'm fine." It was the oldest lie in every hospital. The radio officer spoke again. Sir, base record says Ranger's file contains a restricted attachment labeled Knightbridge Medical. Mara heard the name like a door slamming shut. Knightbridge. She saw a dark landing zone lit by red lamps. She saw 2 stretchers and a 9 refusing to enter the helicopter until she spoke. She saw a young handler named Aaron Pike pressing a bloodless hand against Ranger's harness, whispering, "Don't let her blame herself." Mara had blamed herself anyway. For 5 years, Colonel Mercer turned toward her slowly. "What is Knightbridge Medical?" Mara said nothing. Sloan laughed again, but the laugh was thinner now. Convenient silence. Mercer stepped closer. "Nurse Ellison, did you tamper with the military working dog file?" "No." "Did you falsify your employment documents?" "No." "Did you serve under another name?" The corridor seemed to tilt. Emily looked from Mara to Mercer, confused. Caleb's hand tightened on the leash he had not clipped to Ranger. Dr. Sloan watched with the hungry expression of a man who wanted his first judgment to be right. Mara could tell the truth. She could say she had once been attached to a medical evacuation unit that did not officially exist. She could say Knightbridge was not a mission people discussed in hallways. She could say Ranger had not been unwanted then. He had been trusted more than most officers. She could say the patch under her sleeve was not decoration. It was a piece of a team that never came home whole. But the moment she said it, other names would surface, names she had promised to protect. So she answered the only way she could. "I am a nurse," Mara said. Sloan scoffed. "That is not an answer. It is the answer that matters right now." Mercer's expression hardened. "No, what matters is whether you are a security risk." A chime sounded from the wall panel. The yellow hold on East Service Hall expired. The route flashed green again. Mara's chest tightened. "Do not move that patient," she said. Mercer did not look at her. "Transfer team, proceed." 2 orderlies pushed through the sealed doors with a stretcher and portable monitor. The patient on it was covered, stable, and surrounded by controlled urgency. Nothing graphic, nothing chaotic, but vulnerable in the way every patient is vulnerable when strangers decide where their body goes. Mara stepped toward the stretcher. Security blocked her. "You are done," Mercer said. Ranger slammed one paw against the glass. The sound cracked through the corridor. Everyone jumped. Caleb opened the 9 recovery door instinctively. "Ranger, back!" The dog did not back. He walked out into the corridor with calm precision, ignoring the leash, the handler, the colonel, and the surgeon. His eyes stayed on the moving stretcher. Mara's pulse changed. Not faster, older. She knew that walk. "Stop," she whispered. No one knew whether she was speaking to the dog or the men. Ranger crossed to the wall panel beneath the lockdown map. He sniffed once at the lower vent, then sat in front of East Service Hall's sealed door. A trained alert. Caleb went pale. "Sir," Mercer stared. "What is he doing?" Mara answered before she could stop herself. "He's marking the route as contaminated." Dr. Sloan snapped. "That dog is not assigned to environmental detection." Mara looked at Ranger. He was. Silence fell. The words had come too quickly, too naturally. Mercer caught them. "How would you know that?" Mara did not answer. Ranger turned his head and looked directly at her. For a moment, the whole corridor disappeared. The alarms, the officers, the fluorescent lights, the cruel laughter, all of it faded until Mara saw only the dog who had once leaned against her knee in the back of a helicopter while she promised a wounded young handler that she would get them both home. She had gotten Ranger home. She had not believed she had gotten the handler home. The radio officer's voice cut through. "Sir, base records just added an advisory. It says Ranger's alert profile was modified after Operation Knightbridge." Mercer's face changed, not softened, Changed. Read the advisory. He ordered. The officer swallowed. It says EF9 Ranger rejects a route during medical lockdown. Cross-check with Nightingale protocol before movement. Mara lowered her head. Emily whispered, Nightingale? Dr. Sloan stared at Mara's covered sleeve. Colonel Mercer turned back to her, slower this time. Nurse Ellison, he said, what is Nightingale protocol? Mara's voice was barely audible over the alarm. A promise someone made before he disappeared. Colonel Mercer did not like answers that sounded like grief. He liked numbers, ranks, procedures, and names printed cleanly on authorization forms. Mara's answer gave him none of those things. It gave the corridor a ghost, and ghosts were dangerous in military hospitals because too many people carried them. A promise is not protocol, he said. Mara lifted her eyes. It was to him. To whom? She looked at Ranger. The dog still sat before the East Service Hall door, steady as a stone marker. Dr. Sloan exhaled with theatrical impatience. This is absurd. We are letting a temporary nurse and an old dog delay emergency transfer. Emily surprised everyone by speaking. But Ranger alerted before the transfer moved. Sloan turned on her. You are an intern. Learn when to observe. Emily shrank, but she did not look away from Mara. That mattered. Sometimes justice began as one person no longer looking down. Mercer pointed to Caleb. Scan the corridor. Caleb nodded quickly and pulled a handheld detector from the emergency cabinet. He moved toward East Service Hall, then stopped when Ranger gave a low warning sound. Not a threat, a boundary. Caleb looked at Mara helplessly. Mara held out her hand, palm down. Ranger, the dog's ears moved. The corridor held its breath. Mara had not meant to say his name like that. Not like before. Not in the old cadence, soft on the first syllable, firm on the last. A handler's cadence. A field nurse cadence. A voice trained to carry through rotor noise without becoming panic. Ranger stood. Caleb whispered, He won't let me near that door. He will if you approach from the west side. And keep your shoulders turned, Mara said. Caleb stared at her. Mara regretted it immediately. Mercer heard it too. You know his handling commands. No dogs. No, Caleb said quietly. Everyone looked at him. The young handler swallowed, embarrassed but honest. Sir, that is not general dog knowledge. Sloane's irritation sharpened into accusation. Then she has been hiding credentials. Mara looked at him. You keep saying that as if hidden always means dishonest. What else would it mean? It can mean classified. It can mean sealed. It can mean someone else. Safety depends on your silence. The words struck harder than she intended. Mercer's expression flickered. For the first time, he seemed less angry than unsettled. Caleb approached the west side of the door exactly as Mara instructed. Ranger watched, then allowed it. The detector beeped once near the lower vent. Caleb checked the screen. His face drained. Sir, he said, there is a maintenance override active on this door. Mercer frowned. During lockdown. Yes, sir. It should not be. Source? Caleb adjusted the scanner. Unknown. It is piggybacking on the emergency route map. Mara closed her eyes. That was the clue she had feared. Not a dramatic attack, not the kind of danger people in movies understood. Something smaller, colder, and more plausible. Someone had altered the route. Someone had wanted movement through East Service Hall. The lockdown had not merely trapped them. It had guided them. Mercer turned to the radio officer. Kill the East Hall route. The officer typed fast. System resisting, sir. Override it. I'm trying. The patient on the stretcher stirred beneath the blanket. Emily stepped forward automatically, checking the monitor with shaking hands. Mara moved beside her. This time, no one stopped her. Slow breaths. Mara told the patient gently, You're safe. We're changing the route. The patient's hand shifted, searching. Mara took it. Doctor, Sloan watched, annoyed that competence had entered the room without his permission. Mercer saw it too. The way Mara's voice steadied the patient, the way Emily calmed when Mara stood beside her, the way Ranger remained fixed between the stretcher and the wrong corridor like a living barrier. The corridor had laughed at Mara minutes earlier. Now laughter would have sounded foolish. That did not mean respect had arrived. Suspicion had simply made room for doubt. The radio officer spoke again. Sir, Base Records has opened a thumbnail on the restricted attachment. What does it show? A scan tag. Mercer walked to the terminal. The screen flickered as the file struggled through permission layers. A grainy image appeared. An old red 9-collar tag, scratched, dented, stamped with 3 lines. Ranger K-17 and 9, Emily whispered. A 9. Mara felt the patch under her sleeve like a burn. Mercer looked from the tag to her arm. Your patch has a 9. I.e., it's an old number. Old numbers do not make military dogs alert during lockdown. Sloan stepped in. Colonel, with respect, we are building an entire narrative from a dog's behavior and a scratch tag. Ranger turned his head towards Sloan. No growl, just a stare. It made the surgeon stop talking anyway. The radio officer leaned closer to the terminal. There is a note attached to the tag image. Read it, Mercer said. The officer hesitated. It is partially redacted. Read what is visible. KC-17 Ranger, to remain under medical trust protocol. If separated from a Nightingale nurse, do not force reassignment during acute security events. Doc may identify priority safe route based on prior conditioning. Caleb looked at Ranger with new respect and shame. That is why he refused us. Mara nodded almost imperceptibly. He was not refusing. He was waiting for someone to ask correctly. Mercer heard the grief under it. Were you his assigned nurse? Mara's face closed. No. Ranger whined softly. The rain. That was what almost undid her. Not Mercer's interrogation. Not Sloan's contempt. Ranger's quiet protest. Emily saw Mara flinch. Her voice softened. Nurse Ellison. He knows you. Mara's throat tightened. A lot of patients remember voices. Docs too, Caleb said. Dr. Sloan folded his arms. This sentimental detour is wasting time. Mara turned to him. No, doctor. You wasted time when you dismissed a warning, because it came from the wrong badge. The corridor went silent. Sloan's face darkened. Mercer stepped between them. Enough, but the word no longer landed with the same power. Another chime came from the terminal. The radio officer's eyes widened. Colonel, the system is requesting a secondary identifier from Nurse Ellison. Mara's stomach dropped. Mercer stared at the screen. What identifier? The officer read slowly. Voice confirmation required for dormant medical code. Nightingale 9. Every witness turned toward Mara. Emily's lips parted. Caleb's hand lowered from the leash. Dr. Sloan looked triumphant, as if the trap had finally closed. Well, Mercer faced Mara fully. Are you Nightingale 9? Mara heard the old radio again. Nightingale 9, you are clear to lift. Nightingale 9, 9 is refusing extraction. Nightingale 9, say again. Did the handler make it? Her chest rose and fell once. I answer that, she said. A sealed file opens in front of people who do not have permission to carry what is inside. Mercer's jaw tightened. This is a military hospital under threat, and that is why I am still standing here. Sloan laughed harshly. You are nothing but a nurse who got caught pretending to be important. The words hit the corridor like a slap. Some people looked away, some did not. Mara stood very still. Then Ranger left the door. He walked across the corridor, past Caleb, past Mercer, past the surgeon who had called her nothing. He stopped beside Mara, pressed his shoulder against her leg. and looked up at her with the kind of trust no document could fake. He did not kneel, not yet, but the room changed anyway, because everyone saw that the unwanted dog had chosen the dismissed nurse. The first person to apologize was not Colonel Mercer. It was Emily. She did not say it loudly. She did not make a performance of it. She simply stepped beside Myra while Dr. Sloan glared and the lockdown alarm flashed red over all of them and whispered, "I should have spoken sooner." Myra looked at the young intern's frightened face. "You spoke when it mattered." Emily's eyes watered, but she nodded. That small exchange irritated Sloan more than an argument would have. Cruel men often tolerate resistance better than tenderness. Resistance gives them something to crush. Tenderness exposes what they lack. Mercer ordered. The patient returned to the safer side of the ER, while Caleb and two security officers worked to isolate the East Service Hall override. Ranger stayed beside Myra, not touching her now, but close enough that the old bond shaped the air between them. Myra could feel the corridor recalculating her. A few minutes earlier, she had been an inconvenience. Now she was a question. Questions made people nervous. The radio officer, Lieutenant Harris, kept his eyes on the terminal. "Sir, the system is still requesting voice confirmation. Without it, the Nightingale attachment remains sealed." Mercer looked at Mara. "Can we neutralize the hallway without it?" Harris answered before Mara could. "Might be bay. But whoever altered the map buried the command in old medical routing protocols. The file might contain the original protocol key." Sloan scoffed. "Of course it might." Mara ignored him and studied the map. East Service Hall was not the only problem. The green route had been disabled, but two secondary routes were beginning to flicker. Someone was probing for another path, not with weapons, with access, with knowledge. That frightened her more. "Who else knew Nightbridge routing?" she asked. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "I thought you were not connected to Nightbridge." "I asked who knew the routing. Answer my question first." "You do not have time for pride." The corridor stiffened. No one spoke to Colonel Mercer that way. But Myra was not trying to insult him. She was trying not to remember the last time a commander's pride had delayed a route change by 90 seconds. 90 seconds had been enough to split a team in half. Mercer must have seen something in her face because he did not snap back. "Nightbridge files are sealed," he said. "I do not have a roster." "Then whoever is using that protocol either had access once or found someone who did." Harris typed rapidly. "Sir, there is a name embedded in the override string." Mara looked up. Mercer stepped to the terminal. "Name, Pike." The sound went out of the corridor. Not for everyone. For Mara, Pike. Her hand went slack at her side. Ranger pressed his nose briefly against her fingers, grounding her before anyone else noticed. But Mercer noticed. "Of course he did. What does that name mean to you?" he asked. Mara forced herself to breathe. "It is common." "No, it is not. Not to you." Dr. Sloan leaned forward. Dr. Sloan leaned forward. "You know who is doing this?" "No," Mara said. "But not complete." Mercer's voice lowered. "The override string says Pike. My predecessor on base security was Colonel Adrian Pike. He died before I took command. His son was attached to a classified medical convoy that never fully reported back." Mara turned her face away. "Too late." Mercer saw. "His son," he said slowly, "was Nightbridge." Mara's eyes burned. She could still see Aaron Pike at 26, too young to carry the grief he carried, scratching Ranger behind one ear and joking that the dog outranked every officer because Ranger never lied. She could see him giving Mara half of a stale protein bar before a flight because she had skipped dinner again. She could see him in the last minutes trying to smile while the radio cut to static. She could hear his last clear words. "If Ranger makes it, tell him he did good." Mara had never gotten to tell him. Because Ranger had vanished into recovery transport, the file sealed, and everyone told Mara that asking questions would endanger people still in the field. Do not use his name as leverage, Mara said. The warning in her voice startled even her. Mercer studied her. You knew Aaron Pike. Emily looked at Mara with sudden understanding. Caleb looked at Ranger. Dr. Sloane's expression shifted from accusation to curiosity, which was somehow worse, Mara said. I knew many patients. Was he your patient? Mara looked at the patient on the current stretcher, still waiting for safe movement, still trusting strangers. They all were. Mercer's face changed again. The answer was evasive, but not cowardly. It carried weight. Harris interrupted. Sir, secondary route is trying to open through radiology link. Mara snapped back to the map. Close it manually from the nurse's station. Harris hesitated. That station does not have command authority. IE has old ward authority. If the hospital never deleted the emergency nursing layer. Mercer stared. Emergency nursing layer? Mara was already moving. During mass casualty overflow, nurses could reroute patients when command lines fail. Sloane followed, angry. That system was retired. No, Mara said, reaching the station terminal. It was buried because commanders hated that it worked without them. Emily almost smiled despite the fear. Mara typed into the terminal. Her fingers remembered too much. Menu paths, dead coats, the rhythm of systems built by people who expected radios to fail. A prompt appeared. Medical route override, enter, unit call. Mara stopped. Harris leaned over from the wall. Terminal. What is it asking? A unit call sign. Mercer came closer. Can you enter it? Yes, then do it. Mara's fingers hovered. The call sign was not just a password. It was a key tied to a record, and records had consequences. Opening it could expose Aaron's last route. Ranger's sealed recovery. Mara's identity. My B. Even the names of people who had disappeared into protection. Because Knightbridge had not been an accident, her silence had never been about shame. It had been about keeping the living safe. Ranger stepped beside her chair and rested his chin lightly on her knee. Not a command, a plea, Mara whispered. I promise. Ranger's eyes stayed on her. Emily said softly, My bae, the promise was for this too. Mara looked at the young intern. In Emily's face she saw every new nurse who had ever been told she was too small, too emotional, too inexperienced, too ordinary to know what danger looked like. She saw herself before Knightbridge, before the patch, before the sealed file, before she learned that sometimes the person everyone ignores is the only one close enough to see the truth. Mara typed 3 words. Nightingale 9, active. The terminal went black. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then every lockdown screen in the corridor flashed. Restricted medical file opening. Colonel Mercer turned toward her. Dr. Sloane stopped breathing. Ranger lifted his head, and somewhere deep inside the hospital system, the past began to wake up. The file opened in fragments, not enough to satisfy anyone, enough to unsettle everyone. A black and white identification photo appeared first. The image was 5 years old, blurred by compression and half covered by a redacted banner. But Mara knew it before the others did. She knew the woman's tired eyes, the clipped hair tucked beneath the field cap, the small wing patch on the shoulder. Emily whispered, That's you. Mara did not answer. Her name on the file was not Mara Ellison. It was redacted down to 2 visible initials, MV under it. A line appeared. Attached medical command, Nightingale 9. The corridor was so quiet that the lockdown alarm seemed suddenly too loud, almost embarrassed by itself. Colonel Mercer read the line twice. His posture remained rigid, but the certainty had left his face. Dr. Sloan recovered first because men like him often mistake discomfort for a challenge. A redacted photo and a call sign do not excuse obstruction. Mara looked at him with exhaustion. You still think this is about your pride? It is about chain of command. No, Caleb said quietly. Everyone turned. The young handler swallowed, then continued. Sir, with respect, Ranger accepted her command, identified the compromised route, and the file confirms a matching medical call sign. That is chain of evidence. Sloane's jaw tightened. You are a handler, not an investigator. And you are a surgeon, not a security officer, Emily said. The words escaped her before fear could stop them. Her face went pale immediately, but the corridor heard. Mara turned to Emily, not smiling exactly, but with something warmer than approval. Steady. Emily nodded, breathing again. Mercer lifted one hand. Lieutenant Harris, scroll. Most of it is locked behind Pentagon authorization, but there is a visible field advisory. Read it. Harris hesitated, glancing at Mara. Mara looked away. He read anyway. Nightingale 9 served as field medical coordinator during Operation Nightbridge. Authority recognized under emergency medical autonomy when command communications are compromised. 9 Ranger conditioned to respond to Nightingale route commands after handler separation. Handler separation. The phrase struck Mara harder than it should have. A clean, administrative term for the worst night of her life. Ranger pressed closer. Mercer's eyes moved from the screen to the dog. Handler separation means Aaron Pike. Mara said nothing. That is why the override string used Pike. Might be, she said. Might be. She looked at the map. If someone wanted to manipulate Ranger's file or Nightbridge routing, Pike is the name they would use, because it would trigger old permissions. Why? Because Aaron Pike was Ranger's handler. Caleb lowered his gaze. Sloan stopped looking pleased. Mercer's face tightened with an emotion Mara could not read. Colonel Adrian Pike was my mentor. Mara looked at him then. Mercer's voice was quieter. He spent his last years trying to learn what happened to his son. He was told the answers were sealed for national security. They were, Mara said. And you had them? No. Her voice broke slightly and she hated it. I had questions. The corridor absorbed that. For the first time, Mara was not the only person standing inside uncertainty. Another route flashed green on the lockdown map. Radiology link. Mara straightened. There, that route leads to the public elevator bank. Mercer snapped into command mode. Seal it. Harris typed. System resisting again. Mara moved to the nurse terminal. I need your access card. Mercer looked at her. She held out her hand. It was a simple gesture, but everyone understood the weight of it. Minutes earlier, he had demanded she prove who she was. Now she was asking him to trust her with command access during an active lockdown. Sloan said, absolutely not. Mercer ignored him. He removed his card and placed it in Mara's palm. The corridor shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but people saw. Mara inserted the card and layered it under the nursing override. Command authority alone, one close it. Nursing authority alone, one close it. The old system required both because Nightbridge taught them that command and care had to agree before patients moved. Mercer watched her type. That was in the report. That was in the costs. The words landed heavy. The route flickered yellow, then red. Radiology link sealed. A breath moved through the corridor. Emily whispered. It worked, but Mara was already scanning the map. Hell, try one more. Mercer's head turned sharply. He? Whoever is behind the override. You think it is a person inside the hospital. I think it is someone using an old grief as a key. Harris stiffened. Sir, third route opening. Where? Mercer demanded. Harris stared at the screen. Key 9 recovery. Ranger stood. Caleb cursed softly under his breath, then apologized. The 9 recovery room door lock turned yellow. No, she said. Sloan frowned. Why would anyone route through a dog recovery room? Mara was already moving. Because Ranger's file is the bridge. The 9 recovery room connected to a small records alcove, used for veterinary transfer charts and service animal log. If someone opened that route, they might not be moving patients. They might be accessing the physical file packet that had arrived with Ranger. The unwanted dog had not been sent here by accident. His file had been delivered to St. Adrian's because someone wanted it opened or stolen. Mara reached the recovery room door just as it clicked. Ranger stepped in front of her, not blocking her, guarding the threshold. Inside, the privacy blind shifted. Someone was in the room. Security raised their weapons low, controlled, non-threatening to the crowd, but ready. Mercer moved beside Mara. Stay behind me. Mara almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the command came 5 minutes too late. Ranger will react if you rush. Mercer looked at the dog. This time he listened. Mara lowered her voice. Ranger, watch. The dog stood still, focused on the room. Caleb whispered. He knows that command too. Mara ignored the ache in his words. She opened the door slowly. A records clerk stepped out, trembling, hands raised. His badge read Ben Laro. He was barely 30, pale with fear, clutching a sealed envelope against his chest. I didn't change the routes, he blurted. I swear I didn't. They told me to pull the file when the lockdown started. Mercer's voice was hard. Who told you? I got a message from base records. It said emergency retrieval. Harris checked his terminal. Sir, no retrieval order was issued from our side. Mara looked at the envelope. On the front, stamped in faded red ink, was one word, Knightbridge. Beneath it was a handwritten line that made her knees nearly give way. If Ranger Niels opened this in front of her. No one touched the envelope, even Dr. Sloan, who had spent the last half hour dismissing everything, Mara said, seemed to understand that some objects enter a room with more authority than rank. The paper looked ordinary, cream-colored, creased at one corner, sealed with aging military tape. But the handwriting across the front had turned Mara's world silent. If Ranger Niels opened this in front of her. Mara knew that handwriting. She had seen it on med logs filled out too late at night, on joke labels stuck to Ranger's food tins, on a folded note once left beside her helmet that said, Eat something, Nightingale. That is an order from the dog, Aaron Pike. The corridor blurred. Ranger stood between Mara and the envelope, alert but calm. Colonel Mercer looked from the writing to Mara. His voice had lost its sharpness. Eat, said Aaron's hand. Mara could barely answer. Yes. Mercer inhaled slowly, like a man trying to keep his own history from breaking formation. He wrote this? Actually, Doctor, the physical packet ID matches the file index. It was logged into sealed storage 5 years ago and transferred with Ranger 3 days ago. Sloane's face tightened. Emily looked at Mara. Why would it say that? If Ranger Niels, Mara did not want to answer, because the answer belonged to a night she had buried. In Ranger's unit, kneeling was not a trick. It was not obedience for applause. It was an honor posture, used only in 2 circumstances. Beside a fallen handler during recovery, or beside the medical lead whose command the dog accepted when all other command lines failed. Ranger had knelt beside Mara once, at dawn, after Knightbridge. She had thought it was grief. She had not known Aaron had planned for it. The lockdown alarm changed pitch. Harris looked up. Sir, external authorization just came through. From whom? Mercer asked. The Pentagon Medical Archive. The corridor froze. Harris read, stunned. They are granting temporary review authority to Colonel Mercer, Lieutenant Harris, Sergeant Voss, and Nurse Myra Ellison for Knightbridge packet. Sloan stepped forward. And me? Harris checked. No, doctor. For the first time all night. Emily almost smiled openly. Mercer looked at Myra. The archive named you as Myra Ellison. No, Harris said slowly. It named her current alias for access, but the underlying personnel name is still redacted, Sloan muttered. Alias Myra turned on him, finally tired enough to be direct. An alias can be protection. Doctor, not fraud. You of all people should know that records are sometimes sealed to keep people alive. The surgeon had no answer. Mercer lifted the envelope, but did not open it. The note says, if Ranger kneels. Mara stepped back. Do not make him perform grief for you. That stopped him. The sentence was not angry. It was worse. It was wounded. Caleb looked ashamed. She is right, sir. Mercer lowered the envelope. Then what do we do? Mara looked at Ranger. The old dog watched her with steady eyes, wading through alarms, suspicion, and the cruel weight of human delay. He had been called unwanted because he would not obey strangers who treated him like equipment. But he had not been broken. He had been faithful to a promise no one else remembered. Mara crouched slowly, careful not to command him. Ranger, she whispered. You don't owe them anything. The dog stepped closer, cracked. I'm sorry, she said, so softly only the nearest people heard. I thought you were gone. I thought I left you behind in the paperwork and the smoke and all those locked rooms. I tried to find you. Ranger's ears lowered. I tried, she whispered. The corridor watched, but Mara was no longer performing for them. She was speaking to the only witness who had never demanded proof from her. Ranger moved forward and pressed his forehead gently against her shoulder. Mara closed her eyes. Then, with the calm dignity of a soldier remembering his last true command, Ranger lowered himself beside her, front legs folded, head high, body aligned at Mara's left side. The 9 knelt beside her. No one laughed. No one moved. The corridor that had mocked her became a chapel of stunned silence. Emily covered her mouth. Caleb's eyes filled. Lieutenant Harris whispered, "Oh my God." Colonel Mercer stared as if the floor had opened beneath everything he believed about authority. Mara did not look triumphant. She looked broken and held together at the same time. Ranger stayed kneeling beside her, his old tag resting against the floor, the stamped N9 catching the red emergency light. Mercer opened the envelope. Inside was a folded report, a service photograph, and a small strip of fabric matching Mara's patch. Mercer read the first line aloud, voice unsteady. To whoever doubts the nurse Ranger chooses, stop doubting and start listening. Mara bowed her head. Mercer continued. This is Staff Sergeant Aaron Pike, handler of military working dog, Ranger K-17. If this packet is open, it means Ranger found Nightingale 9 again, or she found him. Either way, you are standing in front of the reason I survived long enough to write this. Mara's breath caught. Survived. The word struck her like light through a sealed door. She looked up. No. Mercer stared at the report. Harris stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. It says Sergeant Pike survived initial evacuation under protective status. Myra shook her head. They told me. Her voice failed. They told me he was gone. They told me asking would endanger the others. They told me Ranger was transferred beyond recovery. They told me silence was mercy. The report trembled slightly in Mercer's hand. He read on, softer now. Nightingale 9 ordered route change against command delay. stabilized 3 patients under blackout conditions, and prevented secondary exposure by trusting 9 Rangers alert. Any future route protocol connected to my name should defer to her medical judgment. If Ranger confirms recognition, Sloan looked at the floor. Mercer's face had gone pale. The public reversal was not loud. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just a proud commander realizing that the woman he had called nothing had once carried the kind of responsibility his rank could not measure. Mara reached for Ranger's collar tag. Her fingers touched the red metal. Under the old stamp lines was a scratch she had never noticed from behind the glass. MV held the line. Aaron had carved it there, so Ranger would carry the truth if no file ever opened. Heresy terminal chimed again. Sir, the route override source has been traced. Mercer looked up sharply. Where? Not inside the ER. It is coming from an archived access account linked to Adrian Pike's old office. Mercer's grief hardened into command. Someone is using my mentor's credentials. Myra stood slowly. Ranger rose with her. The kneeling had changed the room, but the danger was not over. Mara looked at the map as the final route began to flash. They are not trying to move a patient, she said. Mercer followed her gaze. Then, what are they doing? Mara picked up Aaron's report. They are trying to erase why Ranger remembered me. Once the truth had a shape, the room moved differently. Not perfectly. People rarely become brave all at once. Some still stared at Mara as if she had turned into a stranger. Some looked ashamed. Some avoided looking at her at all, because apologies require a courage humiliation never needed. But the corridor no longer treated her as nothing. Colonel Mercer placed Aaron Pike's report on the nurse's station beside Mara. Not above her, not in front of her, but beside her, where both of them could read it. What do you need? He asked. The question carried more apology than his pride could say out loud. Mara accepted it. Because patients were waiting. Shut down all automated route changes, she said. Manual movement only. Assign 2 officers to the old security office. Do not let anyone wipe the archived account. Sergeant Voss stays with Ranger, but Ranger does not leave this corridor unless he chooses to. Caleb nodded at once. Yes, ma. The word touched the hallway. Doctor, Sloan heard it and looked away. Mercer turned to Harris. Do it. Harris typed quickly. Manual lockdown confirmed. Automated routing disabled. The map stopped flickering. For the first time since the alarm began, the red lights felt like warning instead of confusion. Mara moved to the patient on the stretcher. Emily joined her. Steadier now. West corridor is safest, Mara said. Slow pace, no rushing. Keep the monitor lid clear. Talk to the patient the whole way. Emily nodded. I can do that, I know. Those 2 words lifted the intern's face. A few minutes earlier, Emily had been told to observe and be quiet. Now Mara handed her responsibility like a lantern. They moved the patients safely through the west corridor, guided by security and watched by Ranger, who remained at the ER threshold until the stretcher disappeared around the corner. The dog did not need to bark. His stillness had become enough. When Mara returned, Dr. Sloan was waiting. For a moment, he looked as if he might defend himself, explain pressure, blame lockdown stress, claim he had only followed procedure. Instead, he said stiffly, "The transfer is complete." Mara nodded. Good. He swallowed. I should not have called you nothing. You didn't, Mara said. Colonel Mercer did. Sloan flinched. Mercer, standing nearby, accepted the blow without protest. Mara looked between them. But you laughed like it was true. That silence was harder than yelling would have been. Sloan lowered his eyes. Mara did not forgive him. Not yet. Forgiveness was not a tool to make powerful people comfortable. But she did not humiliate him either. "Then remember what it costs tonight," she said. "The next new nurse who warns you might not have a 9 and a sealed file to prove she deserves to be heard." Emily looked down, blinking fast. Caleb rested one hand near Ranger's shoulder. "The archived account is locked, sir," Harris called. "Security has someone in custody near the old office. No injuries reported. Looks like a contractor using dormant credentials to access sealed packets." Mercer's jaw clenched. But they attempted deletion of the Nightbridge attachment after Ranger's file opened. Mara looked at Aaron's report. For 5 years, she had lived with a story that ended in loss. Aaron gone. Ranger unreachable. Nightbridge sealed. Her name buried because survival required silence. Now, the story had reopened in an ER corridor where strangers had laughed at her. Life was cruel that way. It did not always return what it took in gentle places. Sometimes it handed the truth back under red alarms, beside a patient stretcher, with the same dog kneeling at your feet. Mercer approached her with the envelope in both hands. "Nurse Ellison." She turned. His voice was formal, but not cold. "I owe you an apology in front of the same people who heard my contempt." The corridor quieted again. Mara could have stopped him. She did not. Mercer faced the staff, families, officers, and interns who had witnessed everything. "I call this nurse nothing. I dismissed her warning. I treated lack of visible rank as lack of worth. I was wrong." The words did not erase what he had done, but they mattered because they cost him something. He turned back to Mara. "I am sorry." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Listen faster next time." A few people exhaled, almost laughing through tears. Mercer nodded. "I will." Ranger stepped forward and touched his nose briefly to Aaron's report. Mercer's expression changed at the sight. He knew Aaron survived. Mara knelt beside Ranger, this time by choice, and rubbed the gray fur under his collar. Maybe he knew enough to wait. Caleb crouched across from her. "What happens to him now?" That was the question Mara had been afraid to ask. Ranger was alive, stable, protected for the moment. But military dogs with sealed histories and rejected assignments often became paperwork problems. And paperwork problems had a way of disappearing into quiet facilities where no one asked whether loyalty looked like disobedience. Mara looked at Mercer. The colonel understood. "I can request a status review," he said. "No," Mara replied. "Request implies uncertainty. His file proves he is a medical trust 9 with specialized lockdown conditioning. Assign him to hospital support under protected veteran animal status. Sergeant Voss can remain handler of record if Ranger accepts him." Caleb looked stunned. Mara looked at Ranger. "He already let you scan the door." Caleb's eyes shone. "Only because you told him how." "Then learn how to ask him." Ranger looked from Mara to Caleb, as if considering the young man's entire soul. Then he leaned lightly against Caleb's knee. Caleb laughed once, softly, almost in disbelief. Mercer nodded. "I will authorize the request." Mara stood. The lockdown alarm finally stopped. The silence after it felt enormous. Over the intercom, a calm voice announced, "Security lockdown lifted. Air operations remain under controlled movement. All departments stand by for review." People began breathing like they had forgotten they were allowed. Families embraced quietly. Nurses returned to stations. Officers lowered their shoulders. Emily wiped her face and pretended she had not been crying. Dr. Sloan walked toward the trauma bay without his usual hard stride. Mara remained by the nurse's station, one hand resting on Aaron's report. Mercer did not leave. "There is more in the file," he said. "I know. Do you want to read it privately?" Mara looked through the observation glass at Ranger, now sitting calmly between Caleb and Emily as if guarding the whole ER. For 5 years, privacy had meant loneliness. Secrets had kept people alive, but they had also kept grief frozen. She picked up the report. Not all of it. Not tonight. Mercer nodded. Mara unfolded the service photograph from the envelope. In it, a younger Mara stood beside a helicopter ramp, one hand on Ranger's harness. Aaron Pike stood on the other side, smiling tiredly. The photo was creased, but his handwriting on the back remained clear. Nightingale 9 says she is just a nurse. Ranger and I disagree. Mara pressed the photograph to her chest. Emily approached gently. Are you okay? Mara looked at the young intern, the worried handler, the ashamed colonel, the old 9 who had carried her truth longer than any human had dared. No, she said honestly. Then she breathed. But I think I can be. That night, no one insane. Adrian's forgot the nurse they had laughed at during lockdown, or the 9 who knelt beside her when words were not enough. Mara did not need revenge. Ranger had brought something stronger: witness, loyalty, and the truth. And sometimes that is how justice arrives, not shouting, but kneeling beside the person everyone else refused to see. If this story moved you, subscribe to 9 Rescue Nurse and stay kind to the quiet ones.